Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Welcome to the all committee meeting on July 9th, 2019. Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by updating the OPPD website, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on July 3rd, 2019. Today, we'll hear the following committee reports. Finance, Tim Gay. Systems Management and Nuclear Oversight, Rick Yoder. Governance, Mike Kavanaugh. And Public Information, Craig Moody. Mr. Tim Burke will now give the safety briefing.
Great, thank you very much, everybody. We are in the west side of Energy Plaza on the 9th floor. The fire extinguishers, there is a fire extinguisher in this room. There's also a fire extinguisher down at the end of the hallway near the restrooms. The AD and the first aid kit are on the wall near the elevators, either on the side or up on top of each other. Is anyone here certified in the use of an AD or in CPR? So very good. And those of you that aren't, you know what you need to do. There are two exits to this room, two doors here that you can exit out, and they're behind me here. We would exit in the event of emergency. To exit this building, we would take our elevator all the way down to the 17th Street side and exit out. Unless there's a fire, we would not use the elevator. We would use the stairs, go down to the main level and exit out on the 17th Street side of the building. If for some reason we need to shelter in this building due to an event or tornado, severe weather, you'll be directed by our emergency response team members, and the board and executives would actually go to the OPPD call center. Visitors would be escorted by our emergency response team members. In case of a fire, as I said, don't use the elevators. If you have a medical condition, please write it down or tell your neighbor. And in case of an emergency, Mo or a member of OPPD security team will call 911. Are there any questions to the safety briefing? Thank you very much.
Okay, next, we're going to have the finance report. There was no committee meeting this month, but we'll have Javier give the financial report and start with that and go to the next.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm a little nervous because this is supposed to be Julie's birthday present. She said she was really looking forward to the financial summary, so I hope I don't disappoint. I consider singing it, but no, I'm going to spare you.
I already sang to her today, so.
Got me covered. This is the June 2019 financial report. Relatively quiet month, especially compared to last year's June. Just for comparison purposes, I'm going to talk about retail revenues especially. Retail revenues for this year's June were $90.5 million, which is $1.9 million or 2.1% over budget. Pretty close to budget. Year-to-date revenues are $445.3 million, which is $3 million under budget. We're pretty close to budget. As a comparison point, 2018 revenues for June were $3.2 million higher because we had 41% higher cooling degree days than average. This year, our cooling degree days are tracking pretty much with average. So that's the story. Last year, we had a really hot May and June. By this time last year, our revenues were $16.5 million above budget. This year, to date, our total retail revenues are $3 million under budget. So it's a big $19 million gap between last year and this year, and it's all really weather-related, usage-related. Off-system sales revenues for June were $17.7 million, which is $8.7 million over budget. So almost double what we had budgeted for. Most of this is prices in the market. Our units have been called on to serve a lot more. With outages elsewhere in the region, we've been benefiting from seeing those higher prices, which have translated in off-system sales that are higher than budgeted. Other income for June was $10.6 million, which is $3.3 million over budget. I hate to repeat myself, but it's the same story we've been seeing in the past few months. With interest rates continuing to drop, the value of our securities increases. It's the mark-to-market value of our securities increases. We have not necessarily liquidated securities earlier, but the value of those securities increase, and that's reflected in this other income. It's a non-cash element, but it has a positive effect on our net income. Operating and maintenance expenses, excluding fuel and purchase power, for June were $29.3 million, which is $800,000 under budget. Again, executing our budgets really well, very close to budget. If you recall, we've been anywhere between $100,000 to now $800,000 above or below budget. It's very, very close. I think this is one of the closest years we've ever had tracking to our budget on operating and maintenance expenses. Again, it doesn't happen by accident. It's through a lot of work and collaboration with all VPs and our business partners in finance, trying to make sure that we're hitting our budgets tight. Fuel and purchase power for the month of June was $31.6 million, which is $5.6 million over budget. We have purchased more power than we had anticipated on the budget. On the other hand, we have saved on fuel costs as well. The net of these two has been a $5.6 million variance over budget. Other expenses for June were $32.8 million, which is $400,000 under budget. Again, same story with operating and maintenance expenses. We're tracking really well. As you can see on the graph, you can barely notice the difference between the blue and the red line. They're basically on top of each other. It's good planning, even better execution. Going into all of these combined result in net income for June of $25.2 million, which is $9.5 million over budget. Year-to-date net income is $22.7 million, which is $11.2 million over budget. Just as a reminder, I've said this before, part of this net income is affected by this non-cash effect of the mark-to-market of our security. So it's not necessarily that we have sold more power. In fact, we have sold less power than last year. We're pretty much average on sales. It's the interest rate effect that is affecting the value of our securities. That flows all the way down to our net income. Positive news, nonetheless, but it's a non-cash positive news in this case because of the market-to-market. We're still expecting net income for 2019 at the end of the year to be $77.6 million. We're still early in the year. We would like to see the whole summer go through, and then we'll reassess to see where we believe we're going to end the year. But so far, no major surprises on net income for the end of the year. Moving on to capital expenditures for June, were $15.9 million, which is $600,000 under budget. This is the closest month we've been to budget. We had a slow start of the year with flooding and weather conditions that haven't necessarily allowed for a lot of the capital projects to move forward. We have quite a bit of work lined up for this summer. We have a lot of crews out there and materials ordered to catch up for the underspend that we've had at the beginning of the year. And we're keeping a close eye on making sure that we're executing as much of our capital plan as we can in the compressed amount of time we have this summer. Unrestricted cash balances at the end of June were $358 million, which is $14.7 million under budget. Nothing really that concerns me that much. We've been tracking pretty close to budget. Some months a little higher, some months a little lower, but nothing too surprising there. And with that, I conclude the report for June 2019.
Okay.
Any questions?
I have two. The capital expenditures, where much of the flood response, the hardening takes place? Or, I mean, is there kind of two levels? No?
Some of it will take place as capital, but a lot of it is operating and maintenance expenditures. Okay. It's not all capital. If we are protecting our infrastructure with temporary structures, that's not considered capital.
That's O&M.
Correct. So it's a combination of both
capital. But if we choose to go in and say build the levee up to its original height, is that O&M or is that capital?
That's a complicated question. It would require a lot more. Okay. Part of that has to do with the ownership, who owns the levee, and whether or not we can consider that capital if we own it, or if it's the SID who owns it. you get into the accounting capital policy really quick down the road. But your overall concept is correct. Anything that's a major infrastructure build that's long, that has a long life, would be considered capital typically.
Okay, and so thank you for the corrections on the details and for affirming that the concept is a valid concept. To that end, we wouldn't have expected the flood. That would require some capital expenditures. Do we have that capacity looking forward to take care of that?
We do. So we're constantly monitoring our spend, the available capital we have for the year. We're not only the flood, there are other contingent projects that come up throughout the year, and we have to reprioritize within the year to make sure that we have enough flexibility. But to answer your question, yes, we do have that flexibility to react. Further, another topic that would play in here is how much reimbursement we could get for those projects. But that if and when we get the reimbursement, that would be years down the road. The question is, do we have the room in this year's budget? And the answer is yes, we believe we have enough room to
Great.
meet those
So
demands.
that's one of two questions. Thank you very much. I did appreciate your pointing to the fact that the revenues are tied to the degree days, the cooling degree days that are out there. And just want to present again the concept that that because revenues are tied to the degree days, we might want to consider an orientation of the basis of our economic model, be that of similar degree day areas of the country rather than a census definition of the west, more central states. Something we might talk about in August. That's all.
I'll just tie a couple things that you talked about regarding the flood as an example. So in the planning calendar in August, we do have an item on some transmission structures around the Platte River that will be in that capital bucket. That will be asking for an engineer certificate. So that would be an example where
Permanent structures that we
permanent
own,
structures
very
would be
clearly capital.
And I'll just remind you, in 2017, when we had about a several mile stretch of 161 line, if I'm not mistaken, in Sarpy County, I think it was 161, Danny, I'm looking at you, 345 line. We actually went to FEMA and asked for reimbursement to harden that from wood structures to steel structures, and we were able to get reimbursement for part of that expenditure that was capital as well. So those would be the examples of some capital that you may see come up here in the near future. I know the team is looking at some of the transmission infrastructure in the southeast part of Sarpy County that runs along the riverside, and potentially looking at a longer-term strategy to relocate that outside of those areas that now have been, flooded over, a couple, 2 or 3 times over the last several years. So, and so you may see something come up in a broader planning perspective around that in the coming months or years. So,
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
No other questions? You want to go to the reporting item of other post-employment benefit trust report?
The second item here we have is, as Director McGuire mentioned, is the other post-employment benefit, otherwise known as OPEB trusts. We have 2 of these trusts. One is for employees who were hired pre-2008, and the other one is for employees who were hired post-2007. So that January 1 of 2008 was a cutoff date for employees who are eligible for certain benefits on the other post-employment benefits. We refer to the pre-2008 employee trust fund as the Plan A, OPEB A, and the post-2007 trust as OPEB Plan B. Periodically, just like with our pension fund, we conduct asset liability studies on each one of these funds. And it's basically we hire an outside consultant to come in and evaluate what are the liabilities that each one of these funds, for example, the pension fund or the OPEB fund, has. What is the population we're serving? What is the longevity, the mortality tables, economic conditions. What is it that we owe or that we will potentially owe in the future? And then they match that and they analyze also what is the portfolio of securities, what is our basket of securities, our investment policy around those investments, and make sure that we're matching risk and return to the expected liability and disbursements of each one of these funds. We do this periodically, about every 5 years. We conducted an asset liability study for the pension plan back in 2016. That resulted in the pension plan's assets being rebalanced. This is back in 2016. The board was actively engaged on that rebalancing. This is when we brought in a new asset class on real estate for the pension fund. These are real estate funds. The OPEP funds, the last time we did this asset liability study was in 2013. So we did one again 5 years later in 2018. We received those results from the consultant in early 2019, and that is leading us to this revision of the investment policy. It's really just aligning the liabilities with the assets. And let me just talk about quickly about the pre-2008 trust, or OPPD. This is about $150 million worth of assets. This is the larger one of the two. The study was pretty clear, and it showed that there was a preferred allocation of assets that would result in higher returns and lower risk. The best of both worlds. And so what the changes that resulted out of these reallocation, and we're reporting this to the board. This is not a board action item. The board does not need to approve these. The board granted authority to management to approve these when these funds were created. It's no changes to the total equity, but total fixed income would go down from 25% of the portfolio down to 20%. We would add a core real estate category. We didn't have one before. We're adding one now, 10% of core real estate. Reducing real assets from 25% down to 20%. And that would increase the 10-year expected return from 6.9% to 7.1%. And it would reduce the standard deviation, or otherwise the risk of the portfolio, from 12.2% down to 11.8%. These move, in a way, mimics some of the allocations that we made on the pension plan a few years ago. It's adding that core real estate category to lower the volatility and increase the return over the previous portfolio. A similar change happened on the post-2007 trust, although that one it's a lot smaller. It's only $4 million, a little bit over $4 million on that one, because it covers fewer employees, and the benefits paid to those employees are smaller than those who were pre-2008. It's still looking at 30% of total equity, no changes there, and total fixed income, same 70%. However, there's an asterisk on the table, and we're allowing for those fixed income investments to include a core plus investment grade fixed income fund, basically mimicking some of the core real estate attributes that OPEPA has, but we can achieve that through the fixed income portfolio in the post-2007 trust. Why didn't we do a mirror of both? Part of it has to do with the size. When we're dealing with a $4 million fund, there are certain funds that are more expensive to buy, and when you have a small pool, the economies of scale don't necessarily work out that way. So we believe that by modifying the fixed income portfolio of the post-2007 fund to include core real estate, we can achieve the same characteristics of the OPEPA plan, and it wouldn't be necessarily too expensive to get into those assets. Again, it's $4 million of OPEP-B versus $150 million of OPEP-A. Size makes a difference on those investments. Yes?
Does the money be blended together
Pooled.
for purposes of investment and then segregated later on?
Unfortunately not, because they serve very, very specific, very distinct liabilities.
Sure.
What we do, in a way, blend, if you will, we leverage relationships with our fund managers. So we know if we have a fund manager who is also a fund manager on the pension fund and is a fund manager on the OPEB-A fund, sometimes we're able to get fees that are more attractive because overall they're managing a larger amount of funds, but those have to always be segregated, and we have to demonstrate that each fund has sufficiency to meet its own liabilities.
How did you come up with the 70% total fixed income versus 30%? I think you want to decrease your risk there, but, right now, as far as what your expected return is, I guess you don't want to have that extra risk. Is that why you're saying that? You just think since you've got such a long.
Oh, you're talking about the post-2007 trust fund, the OPEB-B?
Yeah.
Actually, one thing that I missed here. The 10-year expected return from OPEB-B is going to go from 4.7% to 5.3%. So we're increasing the return. We're also increasing the risk. The standard deviation goes from 6.8% to 8%. It's still significantly lower than OPEB-A and significantly lower than the pension fund. This is one of the reasons why the committee felt comfortable increasing that risk. We believe that we have enough room to increase that risk and get more return for those assets. The reason you have a 30% versus 70% fixed income, and John is going to probably correct me if I'm wrong here, but our liability with the post-2007 trust ends when an employee retires. This is, if you remember the cash plan for employees, this is the health care piece of that cash plan. So our liability ends when an employee retires. We owe a certain amount to that employee right there. We use it to purchase additional Medicare or health insurance, but it ends there. So the liability is limited. OPEB-A, the liability lives until the employee or the spouse passes away. So there's a lot more runway for OPEB-A. We have more ability to gain earnings on OPEB-A than on OPEB-B. OPEB-B, it's closer, which leads us to having a portfolio that is more heavily invested in fixed income than on equities, because the horizon of the investment horizon of the plan is shorter than on OPEB-A.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have two questions. Do these changes, both in the OPEB and then in the pension fund, do these changes get us any closer to fully funding both of these funds?
No, what gets us closer to the fully funded funds is our contributions,
Okay.
right? One of the mistakes that I would say most, including us, pension plans in the past century have done is we've assumed, and it's not a mistake, it's just we've learned, is we've assumed that earnings are going to be higher than what they end up being. So one of the things that we have to be very careful about this is not assume that by engineering our asset mix, we will be able to get higher returns. The returns that we're assuming on OPEB and the pension plan continue to be low, continue to be risk averse. Really what's going to get us closer to fully funded is how fast are we putting money in, not necessarily how much we're counting of those future earnings. Earnings count, and they count for a lot, but I would say the one variable that would put us closer to 100% funded, it's going to be our contributions. How fast do we want to put money in? The sooner we put it in, the sooner it starts earning.
And those are contributions either from OPPD as an organization or from employees?
From both, yeah,
Okay.
correct.
And then the last question I have is, under real assets, you've added natural resources and infrastructure assets. How would that change?
I'm going to call a friend. John, do you want to come?
Sure. That's your first lifeline.
Hopefully my last one.
John Thurber's always been a lifeline for everybody for many a year.
We don't have a limit on lifeline calls.
Not with John.
Thank you. On the real assets, we've had those investments since 2013. We're reducing them. It's basically I would say an index fund of various asset classes. They include treasury inflation-protected securities. They include some commodities in there. It's basically a fund, kind of an index fund of those, and we're really just reducing that category by 5% and helping to fund the private real estate investment by reducing that index fund of real asset returns by 5%, the same way with the fixed income.
It just looked like from this that was new language put in there, that the natural resources and infrastructure were a new addition to the real
They actually are
assets
not. They've been a
category.
fund that
They've been
we've
in there.
had since
Okay.
2013.
We're cleaning it up to reflect what we've had in the past.
Okay.
And real, in this case, as John alluded to, this is the inflation piece, right? We're investing in certain asset classes that is protected against inflation.
You mentioned on the the expected return increased and the risk decreased. What kind of fabulous investment does that? I guess forgive me, that sounds too good to be true, that you can both increase return and decrease risk at the same time. That's the real estate is doing that?
That's the core real estate is doing that. It is an asset class that, in general terms, has opposite behavior than other classes. So when equities are down, typically your core real estate is going to go up. It's going to reduce liability, and based on performance of these type of assets, it can also increase the return on your assets. So it's rebalancing the portfolio is what gives you these type of increased returns and lowering the risk. I don't expect this to happen all the time. This is not very common, but it's certainly a reflection of, we haven't done this rebalancing in 5 years. Things have changed. We have new products that will allow us to do that. It's exactly what we did with the pension plan in 2017 and 18. It proved to do exactly what it was supposed to do. When real estate held up really well, while other asset classes were not, and it balanced that portfolio.
And so in the B trust, are we not eligible for that same type? It mentions below the core plus. I mean, we're not able to get into some of those other things that the A trust can get into, or what if it does?
It's not economical because of the size. It's $4 million versus $150 million. So what we're doing is we're modifying the total fixed income part of OPPD to include core plus characteristics in that asset category that would help mimic what we're trying to do with the core real estate. Not exactly, but close enough, and it's something that the size of that fund would fit within that investment.
But
if this fund had another $100 million in there, I would have expected that to have a core real estate in there, but it's the size that determines that.
But in the case of the B trust, the risk is increasing as we make that adjustment. I guess the increase in the expected return is larger, so.
Correct.
And this is not my area of expertise, and so I trust that you guys have come up with great recommendations. I'm just trying to understand that in one case
it increases that, and basically what the
asset
asset liability study came back with, it said there's an opportunity to increase the return, and there's enough room that this portfolio can take on more volatility, more risk, based on the expected liabilities of the trust. The recommendation was to increase it from 6.8% on the standard deviation to 8%. It was commensurate with the liability that we have at hand. We could have left it at 6.8%. The consultant report showed us that it was not necessary to have that low of a risk, and with a lower return. That the liability would allow us to increase the risk and the return. We would never increase the risk if we didn't have that increase in return. So the committee.
One of the other reasons we've taken a conservative stance is that trust is currently overfunded.
Correct.
So we don't need to be making a ton of money off of it right now.
Small detail that I've failed to mention.
Kudos on that.
I have a question. Director Molhoff pointed to a revision of some of the language. There was also a revision under the private real estate. So the intent there is to have some participation in the private real estate through an instrument, financial instrument, not to actually own private real estate.
Correct.
Although
We're not in the business of investing in real estate, but this will be a fund that's managed by a manager. It's the same manager that we've had already now a year and a half of experience on the pension plan. It's a fund of real estate investments, a basket of investments, and they come in every year to report on the type of investments they're making. And at a very high level, we feel very comfortable with this fund. They typically invest on non-speculative investments. These are retirement homes. This is student housing.
Could be warehouses.
Some
what I would
industrial,
say,
some warehousing. That's right. But mostly retirement facilities and student housing, which are they have seen the least volatility, well, the least return. But the team studied that a couple of years ago, and we felt comfortable with that.
Absolutely, and I recall some of those discussions. When I see that the language has been is in red here, so it just raises the question for me. While that is what we do, and that is where I think the committee advises that we continue doing, do we exclude the possibility of owning property?
For the time being, we have not analyzed that piece. We have not analyzed the risk, and it's not something that we have recommended.
I don't think so.
Okay.
In my opinion, that would require a much larger discussion.
Yeah.
Do we invest in specific real estate?
No way.
Do we invest in specific equities? Do we invest in specific fixed income? And right now, the policy has been we do this through managers who invest on funds that are baskets of securities.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think I think we've heard recently in the newspaper about others who have done those kind of speculative investments on very specific funds or very specific assets that have not done well over a period of time and did not measure their benefits versus risks and how it may impact their fund. I think we would be held up strong, I think, in the management and the board's ongoing support of that and acceptance and approval of the work we're doing around that is we do everything we need to do to meet our annual required contribution and to make sure that we're funding what we need to fund, whether it's in OPEB or whether it's in pension as well. But I think that's a great comment, so thanks.
Thank you.
When we talk about required contributions, we do normally contribute now to the general pension fund. Does that sort of include the OPEB 1 fund, or do we have two separate contributions?
There are separate contributions and there are separate actuarial analysis. Okay. We usually refer to the benefits contribution as one. The majority of that is the pension piece, but each one of these has its own actuarial study and its own actuarially required contribution.
Okay, and we already said that the post-2007 trust was overfunded. How are we as far as a pre-2008 trust, as far as what's the percentage of funding, overfunding?
John, can you remind me?
Yeah, it's somewhere around 34, 35%. Now, that's very low. Remember, this fund was started like in 2006, and the goal was over a 30-year period to gradually fund up to 100%, to fully funded. Because remember, this kind of a fund, there's changes that could happen where that liability may go away if the federal government takes additional obligations and all of that. So we didn't want to reach full funding immediately. So this is a very long process. We're about a third of the way there.
Okay. And how much, do you have how much money we contribute each year to that? What is that?
About $21 million.
$21 million a year, just to this fund?
Just this fund.
And then how much do we contribute to the general pension fund?
About $54 million.
$54 million. So between the two, it's almost, it's quite a bit.
Yep.
And of course, that figure varies year to year.
Yes, it does. Through our annual actuarial report, it is adjusted each year.
Right.
$70 million.
But every year, for as long as we can remember, we have made the payment of every single one of those pennies.
Okay.
Right, and it's something to be proud of that we could not make
That's
the
right.
payment in
It's
full, but
important
we
that
have
the commitment
chosen
we
to make
have
the
to
payment
our
in full.
employees.
Right.
Yeah. Do you contribute quarterly or monthly, or do you analyze the need for?
It's monthly.
Monthly.
Then we get quarterly reports. But yeah, we don't wait until the end of the year. We're contributing on a monthly basis.
Okay.
Javier, a couple of quick questions. First, thanks for the red line version. This is helpful to see the changes. This is just a curiosity question. We struck one of the criteria upon which we choose investment managers. That's being CFA Institute compliant. What does that mean?
John, can you provide some light?
Yeah, the issue there was that we We don't generally hold individual funds in these accounts. We hold a fund. In other words, then that fund then has investments. If we had an individual investment manager, a CFA certification would mean that they've been certified to perform and manage money. And that's generally, when you see money managers, the CFA certification is generally what you see. In this case, since we're dealing with a fund, these are all funds, we felt it wasn't necessary. If we had individual managers managing individual investments for us, that would be different.
We don't hire an individual, we hire the firm
Right.
to manage our funds. And so the Chartered Financial Analyst certification is something that we didn't consider was necessary.
Yeah.
For
Okay, great. Just,
question.
yeah, just for clarity. Okay, second question. I'm thinking a little bit about the, what I'm seeing in a lot of different places is the movement to minimize investments in fossil fuels. So, and I'm reflecting a little bit on my time in the finance committee last year and some of the conversations that we had with some of our fund managers. How does, without going into the whole wasp's nest of this, but how does corporate social responsibility get accounted for when we're contemplating what our investments will be?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm going to rely a little bit here on Mr. Bruckner on our fiduciary responsibility. Is something that is really, really important here, that these funds are here for the benefit of our employees.
Sure.
And our goal is to make sure that that the funds will be there to satisfy our employees' needs. Yep. And meet our retirement obligations with them. So typically, these type of conversation is usually centered around: do we have enough money in the fund? Are we investing in the right securities to meet that obligation? It's not about what type of securities or what flavor of sustainability, what sustainability profile does the fund have. That could be considered a preference for the board, and it could be challenged by employees to say, I'd rather have you focus on the funding, making sure that we have enough funding, not necessarily what the fund status is. It's a little bit of that original, that onboarding fiduciary responsibility.
I agree with that. I think you described it accurately.
I can remember back, it would have been like in the mid-'80s, I remember my pension fund through the city. There was an effort made to, Coca-Cola, I believe, was an individual stock that our pension fund had significant holdings in. And there were some issues with, I want to say South Africa back then, and some of the involvement they had down there. And there was a movement to sell the Coca-Cola, if you will, because of these political concerns. And they caught holy hell for that. And I believe...
and in that case, if I remember, if I've read the history, it was more political.
Yeah,
not necessarily about the sustainability, but how humanitarian and treatment of people and all great causes. However, from a fiduciary responsibility, and it didn't necessarily meet the criteria of funding. Let's make sure that we fully fund the.
Yeah,
it's fair to say that the fiduciary responsibility pales everything else as far as obligation in this regard.
Your responsibility is with employees, with those employees receiving those payments.
Yeah.
I guess I would add that we do look at the managers and have they been involved with issues, ethical issues or issues, fraudulent issues, as part of our review when we talk to Siegel Marco about our new managers. So certainly there is a review of the managers to make sure that they are competent, that they're ethical, that they don't have any legal issues that would preclude us from wanting to invest with them.
But it's always with the lens of protecting the
Right.
investments and protecting the value of the fund.
But
If they have unethical behavior, it's not that much about the unethical behavior itself. It's about, hey, how is this putting the value of our funds in jeopardy? So that's the reason why we include that as part of our evaluation.
But there are public institutions who have changed their fund managers to more socially responsible and sustainable investment. And
There
so
are, and
a
depending.
conversation maybe to that point
And
is worth pursuing.
I guess I would just say that whatever other institutions have done, certainly, without directing any kind of investment, the board could ask for measures on the investments we make. So, for example, there is the ESG, the Environmental Social Governance metric that's out there. Their Dow Jones Sustainability Index, another index that's out there to which you could ask for how is this performing. Without actually requiring any action, we could ask for a measure.
And the question would be, what action could you take with that index? What
Yeah, I think.
would this inform the board to do?
Yeah.
Great conversation.
I think it's a good conversation, but I think it's a sidebar conversation that should be brought, if it is brought up, should be brought up with the finance committee and to discuss this, so.
I think this is part of the reason why we don't do individual investments into companies.
Yeah, exactly.
Where
Can't do
we
that.
look at an investment in a fund that has hundreds, if not thousands sometimes, of companies and
How do you
whatever that may
put
look
that
at, where
Across industries, across the
How do you do
globe.
that? How do you
Exactly.
pull that out? Then you don't, yeah.
Well, even so, there are funds that can be measured that.
No doubt.
No doubt, but, you
I
know,
agree.
I think this is a sidebar that we can bring to the finance committee if they choose to look at that, and I think there is somebody on the finance committee here, and myself, you know, we can bring that up as far as returns. And I have a feeling that returns would not be as good, and we would be in trouble as far as funding our.
Well, so that may or may not be
How
true.
would you do that?
And again, my intent was, I was curious. My intent was not to start a whole thing, but if we as a board decide to have the conversation, that's great. My reflection, though, on my time in the finance committee, my perception was that it's considered more than I think we're articulating. I mean, there were some fund managers who came and presented to us and talked about how important this was as an investment strategy. So I don't, yes, I understand and fully agree with the primary purpose and our fiduciary responsibility, no question about it. But I think we're a lot closer to having investment managers that are incorporating these things, because quite honestly, if they're not, then they're not following the trends.
For sure, and they look at these sustainability issues, they look at social responsibility, they look at women representation.
Absolutely.
A whole different, whole suite of categories that they're looking at and trying to promote their investments as social responsible. And we take those into account. Hey, that's great. However, it's not something that we have ever directed fund managers to say, you will include these and exclude the other than on the attributes of return and risk, which is really what's driving the requirement for us to meet the obligation with our employees. Sure.
And if I could, I'm so sorry. If I could just respond to the following trends. There's bandwagon, and then there's measurable response to a trend. So that's why I throw out that there are metrics that are out there.
Sure.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And I think the only thing that I would add here is that if we can meet the fiduciary responsibility to grow the fund at the rates that we have to and meet sustainability metrics,
Would be wonderful.
why wouldn't we do that?
Right.
So I think that maybe having an understanding of where we stand now with the makeup of this, then we can decide whether we need to take action or not. And I don't know what that action might be. So.
Okay, we'll take that as
I
part
think
of
it's something that certainly can be looked at. The idea of the board directing management to invest in funds because of sustainability goals greatly concerns me in terms of the board's fiduciary responsibility for these funds. It's very similar to what Director Kavanaugh referred to when there was a trend that across many industries to divest from South Africa because of apartheid. And there were numerous ERISA lawsuits. We're not subject to ERISA, but we are indirectly subject to it. And professional securities lawyers monitor the performance of retirement funds like ours, and they watch what's going on in terms of the management of those funds very carefully. And so OPPD has what is, in my experience, one of the very best and most robust approaches to the management of these funds of any company, any public entity that I'm familiar with. And so while I think the conversation is very worthwhile and it's something we should look into, I would caution the board to, in terms of directing management to engage in that type of an investment approach, as opposed to following professional management guidance, which is what we're talking about here.
So I appreciate that. But the structure of your response is that you can't do both, which is what I think I heard over here from Director Wagner. Certainly, the SEC has already done through Sarbanes-Oxley and other rules.
That's a totally different deal. Sarbanes-Oxley is a different issue.
But
That's
there
an
are
accounting principle.
reporting requirements that would be helpful for if we ask for that kind of information. Are there not?
What are you referring to?
Well, environmental or sustainability reporting.
Not under Sarbanes-Oxley.
SEC then more broadly.
You're talking about accounting principles, Director Yoder, as opposed to what we're talking about here is once you have created a retirement fund or other benefits, which rests within the discretion of the board to do, then the question is, how is that to be properly managed? And what's the best way for the board to fulfill its fiduciary duty with regard to those funds? And my comment is, while there are certainly metrics out there that address sustainability issues, and they're very worthwhile looking at, because to Director Wagner's point, it may turn out that there are funds that pursue sustainability goals that our professional managers would say, yeah, that's a really good choice. And you would still be within your fulfillment of your fiduciary duty. What I'm concerned about is being directed in that way, by the board doing that without the necessary information to determine whether that is prudent or not is very much a slippery slope, and that's why I'm alarmed by it.
Okay, and that's
Thank you.
exactly why I think we will bring this back again to the Finance Committee. We can look where our pension funds are related to sustainability funds or whatever, and let's get some facts on this first of all, and I agree with you, Mr. Bruckner, as far as our fiduciary responsibility. So let's bring that back. You know, we can have management look at it for us and maybe get some numbers, but I don't think we should be in this ballpark. I think it is a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, I think we've heard some really good conversation around this. So, I mean, let us take it back and have some discussion around it from the management side, and bring it back to the Finance Committee and kind of our thought and process around it. That's great. And see if that scratches the itch and meets the needs of the intent of the conversation here. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask just a logistics question? Is there some kind of stakeholder representation in the decision-making process? You mentioned the employees might not be satisfied if we made a decision that was not in favor of maximum return. Is there some input process by which recipients or beneficiaries of either of these trusts can provide their feelings on what the investments are that are in the trust?
So part of it, the committee is formed by VP of Human Capital, Director of Total Rewards, myself, Director of Treasury, Director of Accounting, and we always have a union representative sitting in those meetings representing that part of the house. So yes, very much so. It's not an open meeting with 4,000 people voting, but there's representation in there for when we make these decisions and when we interview managers, when we evaluate their performance, not only when we change the policy.
But so as we discuss what we think the employees or the recipients of the funds might want, we don't have to just assume that. There is a direct mechanism by which we can hear from them about what they would like to see from the funds and the benefit and the
And that is today in there. So these, what we're bringing to you today, I believe that represents that.
Right. Yes. I just wanted to make sure that is already a mechanism that is in place.
Correct.
That we can, if we were looking for additional information, we could just straight up say, please provide input. And there is a mechanism for that. Thank you.
You're on the Finance Committee?
I'm not.
Who is on the 1, 2, 3,
The
and Mr.
Yeah, the women are.
And Mr.
Woman
Gay.
power, and Mr. Gay.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, if that concludes finance, or is there anything else? I
That's
think
it for me.
That concludes finance, and we'll go to system management. If you had a pre-committee meeting, Mr. Yoder.
We did, and I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but I was really happy to see the the report out on SD9 that we got during the pre-committee meeting. One of the things, just kind of reflecting on the content, and that's where I'm going to try not to steal anything, is that much of the information that the board had received, not much, part of the information in SD9 was information similar to what the board had received during the 4-hour training sessions. I'm very happy to see, and I've heard from other directors, that some of this is making its way out to where the public can access it. I was happy also that we had that pre-committee meeting because there were a couple of questions that were suited for a smaller group. But I'm really pleased that we're going to get a chance to see it here. And then on SD7, I've been pitching out some ideas on folks, and if we haven't talked to each other, other board members, then I'd really like to get those conversations locked in so that you can hear some of the concepts I've been floating.
And SD, that will be brought up in the August retreat, September retreat, August 28th, is that it?
Well, I think those conversations will still happen
Yeah,
between
but I
now
think
and
we'll
then.
also be
Yeah.
bringing that up then, as far as
Very good.
prioritizing SDs.
All right, and so with that, that's what we had in terms of that earlier meeting. Then we have items that I have not seen. So do we want to go to that first, to the contracts?
Yes, Mr.
Board
Bell.
action.
Mr. Belt's, Mr. Vi had a
Danny's.
family vacation that was determined here, and we allowed him the opportunity to go do that. And
Okay,
Mr. Danny
good.
Belt, who is kind of acting director at this point in time of our substation engineering side, is subbing and doing a fine job on the senior maintenance side. So thanks.
Glad to be here, glad to be part of this. So I believe we have a little bit of a screenshot here, or a presentation slide that kind of shows exactly what we're talking about in this RFP. So RFP 5593 is a request for proposal for a 161 to 13.8 kV transformer. It's a predominant style transformer used for load serving in our substations here in the metro area. The initial purchase on this contract will be for 2 transformers to serve residential and commercial load growth in expanding areas of our system. These areas are immediate high growth areas and require these transformers to continue to serve the increasing load. The first unit is going to be delivered in the spring of 2020 to a existing substation in western Douglas County. The second unit is going to be delivered in the fall of 2020 to an existing substation in north central Sarpy County. The contract language that we have in this RFP is to allow OPPD the ability to exercise extensions of the contract for up to 4 additional 1-year terms. So essentially, after these first purchases of transformers, if another need arises over the next few years, we'll be able to leverage this contract to buy additional transformers. There were 7 total proposals received. 3 were deemed legally responsive. So the 4 that were deemed non-responsive, they provided alternate terms and conditions in their proposals that really we are not allowed to accept in a public sealed bid contract. 2 of these proposals were deemed technically responsive, meaning that of the 3 that were legally responsive, 1 was not technically responsive. They were missing some documentation, required us to provide a full evaluation of their proposal. So the 2 remaining proposals that we were reviewing that were both legally and technically acceptable, we took into an economic evaluation. So those were the proposals from the Hyundai Power Transformer USA and WEG Transformers USA proposals. The Hyundai Power Transformer USA proposal was the lowest price per unit, but they're manufactured in Ulsan, South Korea, so it's not manufactured in the lower 48. So OPPD uses a predefined evaluation criteria in our RFPs for domestic versus offshore suppliers. There's an inherent risk in receiving things offshore. They need to be assembled or disassembled in a much more complete fashion. They're shipped without oil. So that additional cost for OPPD, once we receive the unit on site to both fill with oil and fully assemble the unit, is an increased cost for us on our side, as well as an increased risk to the project should pieces get lost or damaged in transit. So due to the increased cost, in the evaluation that we performed on these transformers, we deemed that the WEG Transformer USA proposal was the lowest and best bid of the two. WEG Transformers USA provided an escalation term in their contract for us to use over the 4-year extensions, and we reviewed that and deemed it to be acceptable. WEG Transformers USA was part of a WEG, the parent company WEG Industrial, founded in 1961. They're a supplier of multiple different electric products for different industry sectors, including industrial motors, wind generators, and of course transformers. OPPD has purchased similar units from WEG in the past, and all of these in our service territory are performing very well at this time. The engineer's estimate for this RFP was $1.37 million, slightly below the proposed price of $1.77 million. Differences are attributed to some of the recent effects of tariff pricing on steel, as well as increased market demand for transformers, which is probably the predominant factor in the increase over the engineer's estimate. Based on legal, technical, and economic evaluations, we're recommending that the board authorize the award of RFP 5593 to WEG Transformers USA for the initial purchase of two 161 to 13.8 kV transformers, with the option to renew up to 4 additional 1-year terms for the procurement of these substation power transformers.
Can I ask 2 questions? The first
Sure.
one is, do you have a specific dollar amount we put on the risk that was involved in the Hyundai bid?
Yes, we do. We include that in the proposal, the RFP that goes out the doors. There's a 10% adder
10%.
that we add to the proposal evaluation process.
Okay. The next question I guess I have is, obviously several of our bidders, even though their prices were higher, I noticed were legally not responsive. Is that alarming at all when we see the majority of the bids coming in that aren't responsive? Is there a common thread or common reason, I guess, why they're not responsive, or is it just is it all over the place?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Steve, I
Steve?
understand, or you guys?
Feel free to start, Danny, if you want, but I can address anything that you'd like me to on that.
It's not uncommon for a lot of manufacturers that supply product to OPPD to kind of lean on previous terms and conditions. So if they've supplied us materials in the past, they might pull out one of those old terms and conditions contracts and say, we want to use this for this proposal. A lot of times, in particular on one of these suppliers, it was from 2006, so quite a bit older than what we would like considering the recent changes we've made to our terms and conditions. So I would say it's not alarming, but it is something that we usually go back to these manufacturers, particularly preferred supplier relationships where we know that there's going to be another relationship with a supplier in the future. We'll reach back through our supply chain group and maybe pre-negotiate terms that we can keep on file. So if we propose these kinds of things again, they'll be able to leverage something that we've already agreed to. But in this case, it's not extremely alarming. There were several suppliers that were able to accept our terms. And we would probably, like I mentioned, reach out to a few of these if we thought that our candidate pool was fairly small as far as the number of proposals that we received. So I don't know if Steve has got anything further to add to that.
You've answered that really well. I'll just add that as you can see in my legal opinion letter, there were at least a couple of the bidders who were determined to be legally non-responsive who submitted a proposal that said, here's our proposal, it's not a firm price, and we're using this as a basis to negotiate. And so as everyone knows, in a sealed bid situation, that just doesn't work. It'd be okay if we were doing a request for proposal that was outside the sealed bid process, but because then we could go back and forth. We just are unable to do that in a sealed bid situation. I will tell you that we work very closely with supply chain management that when we get comments on the legal terms and conditions in a sealed bid context, as much as possible, we try to accept that as long as the proposal doesn't go too far to the point where you're really dealing with a document that's completely non-responsive to the RFP. And we just don't really like to throw out bids on the basis of being legally non-responsive, but in this situation, we really didn't have a choice, unfortunately. It doesn't happen very often, which is good.
Thanks, guys.
So question, if you need to extend this to additional units, would that be presented to the board, or are we giving you blanket authority to go ahead and extend this contract for additional years?
That might be another good one for Steve to answer.
Would that be a reporting or an approval process?
You are giving authority within the, the parameters that are laid out in the resolution, which is for a couple of renewal terms.
Okay.
Yeah. But not blanket, and at least not the way, as I would understand blanket. It's only within the parameters of the contract document, which calls for a couple of renewal terms. I don't have it immediately here. And for these types of
4 additional
product.
one-year terms.
That's
Four-
right.
So,
So that's the, and to answer your question further, it would be certainly normal to report those
Okay.
items to the board. It's really a board's preference, but I think that would be the common practice.
And Danny, maybe you could explain the importance of the reliability of this, is having those additional options to hurry up and get some more transformers if we would need them. Is that how we're sort of doing as far as reliability? Can you explain the importance of this contract, that as far as renewing the 4 additional?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the immediate need, the first 2 transformers that we're going to deliver, they are what we consider immediate high-growth areas of our system. So they're the areas of our system that are seeing the most rapid expansions, residential developments, commercial developments. We're trying to stay ahead of that. So from a reliability standpoint, we are soon going to experience a summer peak condition where the loads are higher than the capacity to serve them, especially in a contingency scenario. So if we lost, a component of our system, we need to make sure that there's enough capacity built into the system to be able to get around that failed component in some way. So the immediate need really is to make sure that there's enough capacity being served in the distribution system to be able to serve those summer peak loads. And the types of ways that we would leverage a multi-year contract like this would be for like an emergency replacement. So if we had a unit that failed out there on the system due to whatever condition, what this allows us to do is immediately expedite, some level of a purchasing mechanism with this supplier to be able to make sure that those transformers could get here as expeditiously as possible. We do have spare units in our system, but it's not uncommon for us to put one of these transformers in service as a spare to back up something, and now we need to replace that spare. So this allows us to do it in a way that doesn't add, a few more months worth of board process, to acquire them.
In my experience is when we've done this on when we've agreed to pricing and what those incremental year increases maybe in the pricing, depending on where the market is on those.
That's right.
We would still go out and do kind of an RFI and get an example of what that pricing is. If we think the pricing is lower by doing an RFP or a closed bid or a sealed bid, we would go ahead and do that if we thought. And so in this case where it's coming above the engineer's estimate at this time, we may or may not go out and do a sealed bid again, depending on what we think the market conditions are. But we'd get a sense of that based on our work with the different vendors on where the pricing would be before we would make that determination. Right. And then come back and report the purchase, which would be over that $500,000 to the board. So.
this is just for the equipment, or they'll be installed by our own crews?
Correct.
No contracted crews?
Nope, this is just for the material purchase itself.
Okay.
Director Williams?
Engineer's estimate is prepared in-house, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and then when was this estimate prepared? Because it's more than 20%, sorry, the final bid is more than 20% over the estimate, so.
Correct, yeah, this estimate, engineer's estimate would have been prepared right at the time of bid opening, so it would have been just a few months ago, I believe we opened this in June, so it would have been prepared early June. The engineer's estimate was based on our previous history with purchasing transformers of this size, and the last one we purchased was in 2016. So, based on our history of purchasing these types of units, with some adjustments to market condition that we knew about, as well as some contributions to tariff impacts were included in the engineer's estimate. It probably wasn't enough to reflect the increased demand that's on transformer manufacturers right now in the industry. So usually production capacity is the biggest driver for the fluctuations in transformer market pricing. And we're hitting kind of a peak, a little bit higher than maybe what we would have expected back in 2016 when we last bought them.
And then following on what Director Mulhoff pointed out, if we do choose to exercise that extension, if for additional transformers in the future, do we have guidelines on what those prices will be? Are we getting a fixed unit price that they would continue to meet in the future on an extension, or will that be variable?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this proposal from this supplier actually had escalation terms in it. So what they do is they base some major components, electrical steel, copper, aluminum, oil, those kinds of things are predefined based on indexes, some nationally recognized indexes. So they adjust all of those based on a monthly basis for whatever the index is doing. So they're bidding a baseline, and then we'll adjust based on the index change over the course of the 4-year contract.
Historically, we've seen some pretty wild swings on the price of transformers, haven't we,
we really
throughout the
have.
years? Just
Yeah.
for a variety
If there's
of reasons.
storms and everything, all of a sudden everybody's, you know.
Right.
Commodity prices.
Yeah, transformers are inherently volatile just because there's very few suppliers. They take a long time to fabricate. So production space is a premium, especially when you start seeing anything regulatory that pushes for, increased number of transformers on the system. Anything like that would drive the price of these things up quite a bit.
Danny, in your introductory comments, you said that there's an increased market demand for transformers right now, and then you talked about production. So can you clarify what would be driving the increased demand?
I think that, we don't, of course, we can't talk to the manufacturers until after we've awarded, right? So we don't have a way to specifically ask a lot of the questions about, all of the variations that went into the increase over our engineer's estimate. But what we do see is a lot of, reliability projects taking place across the country. There's a lot of focus on sparing strategies and things like that across the industry, and so those things are what we anticipate are contributing to this increase.
Thank you.
If the board has recalled, Mr. Lang kind of presented some work on SPP and some of the transmission. So whenever there's transmission that's being built, certainly within SPP, just SPP, you can see all the transmission projects over a period of time. Those are attaching to something, right? And they're attaching to these kinds of infrastructures in one way or another. And if it's not the major 345 lines or the 500 kV lines, it's something that's occurring at a lower voltage on the system. So we're seeing that across not just SPP footprint, but all the other RTOs as well.
Director Wagner?
So WEG's parent company is a Brazilian company. In their response, did they confirm that these will be manufactured here in the United States?
Correct. These will be manufactured at actually they purchased a company called CG Power Systems in 2017, and they have a facility in Washington, Missouri, and that's where these are going to be manufactured.
Okay. And does Hyundai have the ability to manufacture these in the United States? Or?
Yes, they do. They have a potential to build even bigger transformers than these in the U.S. It's just that I think their production capacity in the U.S. is full, or they thought they could build it cheaper using an overseas fabrication facility. And so it's not uncommon for some large suppliers to the electric utility industry to have facilities either in the U.S., Mexico, Asian markets, and they just kind of move around where they have the most free capacity, as well as where they think they can get the best pricing based on how they need to propose. So
These are big companies, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, all of these companies have different locations, but okay, very good. Thank you.
Any other question? So this will be an action item for Thursday night. It'll be on the consent agenda, I imagine.
I believe, yes,
Yeah,
it will be
right.
consent agenda, if everyone agrees with that.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. And thank you very much. That was a great report out. Then, if we could, VP Fernandez, we are looking forward to your SD9 resource planning monitoring report. This too will be an action item.
This is an action item for your consideration to vote on Thursday. This is System Management Committee reporting on SD9 resource planning. It is my pleasure to report once again, as we do every year, on the compliance and sufficiency and compliance on these strategic directive. My goal today, I'm going to try to go through these relatively quickly. We had an in-depth conversation with the Systems Committee I'll try to touch on all the points here, but given the time, I'll try to expedite a little bit of the conversation. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is a little repetitive from last year, so it's basically saying what we continue to do. I'm going to place special emphasis on the things that are new. That's where I'm going to spend a little bit more time this time around, if that's okay with you. This is the language that we have on SD9 resource planning. Really, the 3 bullet points there are the ones that we're focusing on here. Resource planning is, I would say, it's a critical function of any electric utility, especially here at OPPD. It's certainly not different here at OPPD. It is a function that we use to balance all of our resources to meet all the other strategic directives, from affordability to reliability to sustainability and customer satisfaction, and et cetera. The first bullet point here, it says that periodically OPPD will assess for strategic and integrated resource plans OPPD's mix of generation assets, demand-side management programs, purchase power agreements, and renewable energy resources. Let me start with the beginning. Before we look at the resource plan, at the resources that we have to meet our load, a very, very important part of our resource planning process is to look at that load. Let's understand what is that load that we're serving, and that starts with a very complicated process to forecast that load. Let's make sure that we understand who's consuming our that power, where is that coming from, what are the trends, so that we can then better plan for how do we meet that load or that demand. This is a pictorial of some of the processes and inputs that go into load forecasting. This is one that was shared with the board on these training sessions. It includes all the way from load loss studies, generation, the production side of the house. We have actual data from load, from consumption in the region, from our customers, all the way from residential to industrial. We include in here, very important, is also how are our customers using power? How are they using electricity? This is where part of that energy efficiency goes in here. How are our customers using or not using power, and how we expect them to use or not use power as we have more energy efficiency appliances? We have different patterns of consumption that consume sometimes less, sometimes more with electrification of the economy, with electric vehicles, and all of those go into the customer data that help us also go into the forecast manager. Earlier today, we talked about weather and how weather has changed from last year to this year. That is also a big piece on how much power, how much energy our customer owners going to use into the future. And we use a lot of statistical tools to gather all this input and transform it into a energy and peak demand forecast. Really important, and I want to emphasize that it's not just meeting the load as we have it, and we take the load for granted, and that's a given, but it's also what are we doing on the load side to lower that demand. It's just as important as meeting that demand with resources. Dispatch modeling, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one. This is a big change we made in 2018. We had a very good legacy platform to conduct dispatch modeling. It simulated electric markets. It included extensive details in generating unit, operating characteristics. We included transmission grid topology and constraints. We also included different planning to support economic transmission planning. This is what we've done for a number of years. We are improving upon this dispatch modeling tool we added a new platform in 2018 that is allowing us to do what we used to do with the legacy platform, plus it allows us to model a dynamic and volatile marketplace with wind and solar and batteries happening in all across the country and in our SPP region. That volatility has increased. This type of dispatch modeling allows us to capture that volatility. That volatility is also captured because we are capable of modeling on a sub-hourly basis. A lot of this volatility happens within the hour, right? And so from earlier in the hour to half the hour and later in the hour, those prices and loads and congestions change. And so we're able to model different conditions within that hour. So we can hone in a little bit, even more on what happens within that hour and further calibrate our plans better. Also, this is allowing us to design customizable models, and we have significantly, between the modeling tool and our computing capabilities, we can now produce a lot more results. We can run a lot more scenarios, stochastic scenarios that gives us even better information. Just the computing amounts, the number of runs that we can complete has increased, and the time has shrunk. Very excited about this, and it's not just a platform. I want to give a shout out to the people who are running this. It's not just a program where you can push a button. It's a lot of computing power from the human aspect of the house. We have really bright individuals who have continued to sharpen their skills and being able to use these new platforms in a much better way. Another part of this, I want to touch on 2 slides that we presented last year. There are two time frames that we use for resource planning, and I want to make sure that the public and the board is aware of these. One is a short-term outlook. This is resource planning that we do on a constant basis, and we're really not looking at long-term changes to our resource portfolio. It's really to meet short-term requirements. This is what we use to prepare the corporate operating plan year in, year out. Do we have the right resources? Are we managing our load in the right way so that we can then have resource adequacy in the short term? We do this all the time. It's a shorter process. In here, we include, I talked about energy efficiency, I talked about electrification of the economy. In here, we also include demand-side resource options, so demand-side management. How are we interacting with our customers, and how are we asking them to help us shave their demand or shave the peak load when we have to do that? This is something that happens mostly in the summer months when we're expecting warm and humid evenings. In the summer months, we have demand-side programs that allow us to shape that load. In here, we include fuel and power purchase forecasts. Really important. It's not only how are we meeting the megawatt demand, but also how are we meeting the dollars, making sure that we're balancing with an economic packet. We include environmental regulation as well. We know that we have to, at the very minimum, meet environmental regulations. So as we design different portfolios and different operating parameters for the units, we're looking at meeting all of those regulations as well. This is, again, from a corporate operating plan, shorter window horizon planning. At the same time, we have a different type of planning. This is one that is more involved. It requires a lot more time to analyze. And this is really looking at 20 years out. So not only are we meeting our load and we have the right plan to meet our load in the next 5 years, but in the next 20 years, what's going to change in the next 20 years? This is more involved. We include the same type of inputs, but the planning horizon is longer. This is one that typically results in an integrated resource plan, like the one that we published in 2016. We submitted to the Western Area Power Administration. We plan on doing that again 5 years after, so in 2021 we'll do that again. But we don't have to wait until we have to file an IRP. We do this type of planning all the time. It may or may not result in an actual resource plan, but this is something that happens all the time. Very, very important is the stakeholder outreach. We used to have just a stakeholder outreach at the end of the process. It was mostly a tell. Hey, this is what we've done. This is the analysis we've conducted. This is where we're leaning towards. And we heard loud and clear after the last IRP process that our customers wanted to be involved at the beginning as well. So it's not just a tell, but hey, we would like to see certain things in the plan. We would like you to consider certain things in the plan. And we've certainly modified these processes. We haven't had a full cycle of these so far, but I'm fully anticipating that when we're ready to start talking and we have enough information to start presenting different portfolios, that we will have an early stakeholder outreach as well as a late stakeholder outreach once decisions have been vetted with the board and with management.
Do you have a timeline on that?
So,
as far as stakeholder outreach, as far as a realistic timeline?
well, it depends. So if, let me use the IRP as an example. We're
Right.
planning on having another IRP in 2021 to meet the 5-year requirement with the Western Airport Administration. If that were the case, if that's just using that as an example,
Right.
we would probably go out to stakeholders probably a year or maybe over a year earlier. We will not go out to stakeholders without us having enough information. That's another thing.
Correct.
We're going to be working on these. We're working on these now.
Right.
When we have enough information to present good information to stakeholders, for stakeholders to react, we will have that probably a year in advance.
Okay.
And we will spend probably the majority of that ensuing year debating and discussing, refining assumptions, so that we can come out at the end of that process to the board with recommendations that are also validated with the stakeholder outreach at the end of the process. But this is a year to 18-month long.
We don't have, we
That's what I
haven't
needed to
described
know.
what that stakeholder process will look like either.
Yeah.
We'll do that in that time frame too, and come back to the board as we are prepared to be able to do that.
And I would venture out to say that the stakeholder process is going to be very different each time. It depends on what resources we're considering, what the nature of the whatever we're considering that at that time, that specific time. Some of it might be more intensive, some might not be as intensive. So it'll depend.
Do you have something, Director Will? Oh, you do, okay.
How does that then relate to the decarbonization study that we talked about last month?
Great question. So the strategic initiative that Mary Fisher described at the last board meeting is one that certainly takes these. This is a tool that informs part of this decarbonization study. How that strategic initiative eventually turns into a stakeholder process, we don't know that yet. It's too early to tell. But I would say this is a tool, very, very important tool, that is informing that strategic initiative.
If I could just make a comment here, I think in the bigger picture of stakeholder process or the broader definition, this is part of it, where people can see what the process is, start to ideate about, what are the kind of resource options that they would like to contribute. So this is certainly part of your stakeholder process, and I really, as I said earlier, do appreciate the detail that we're getting here.
Right, exactly.
Okay, the next slide is just a snapshot in time. It's just to illustrate we've been going through a ton of change in not only our footprint, our service territory, but around us. And this is just to illustrate the big changes that have happened. It's not all the changes by any means, but these are some of the largest changes that we have seen happening around us that are influencing the type of work we're doing on resource planning and transmission planning. Starting with those icons in the black ones, it's retirements of generation sources. Not only like Fort Calhoun Nuclear Station or the refueling of North Omaha 1, 2, and 3, but also across the river with our neighboring utility. When they choose to retire plants, it affects us, right? Megawatts and electrons don't discriminate between power lines, so we have to take into account what others are doing around us to figure out how do we plan not only our generation but our transmission system to accommodate those flows. Significant amounts of megawatts have been retired since 2009 in the past decade. Also, significant amount of megawatts have been added in the past decade, all the way down at the south in Nebraska City 2, just celebrated its 10th anniversary. A couple of months ago, in May of 2009, that station closed breakers, and so it's another big part of a big change that has happened in the region that we take into account as we balance. The four windmills at the corner at the top of that graph shows some of the largest, not the only ones. There are many other wind farms, but these are some of the four largest ones that we have seen coming to our territory. 3 of them we have power purchase agreements with the owners of those wind farms. The other one is Rattlesnake, where it's not necessarily our power purchase agreement, but it's one that is serving other customers. Regardless of who they're serving, it's power that's flowing through our systems that we have to account for reliability purposes and resource adequacy. And last but not least, we have the yellow icon with the F. in the middle, and we all recognize that font from Facebook, the Facebook data center. It's an example. It's not the only one. We've had economic development happening in different parts of the region, but it's probably the largest one and the most notable one that we have to date of additional load, additional demand for that power. They have committed to using their wind power, 100% renewables. But when the wind is not blowing, we also have to connect and make sure that we have a resource adequacy to serve that data center with a quality that we always serve our customers. It's an example. It's not meant to be exhaustive, but it's an example of the major changes that have happened in our region in the past decade. I don't want to forget to show the red line and the blue line down there. These are major transmission projects that have either been completed, as in the case of the blue line, the MTP project that we built down south in our territory, and the red line, that's the R plan that the Nebraska Public Power District is working on, and they're planning on that. So large transmission projects have to be incorporated into our planning to say, hey, if we add or subtract generation or load, we need to make sure that we have the transmission infrastructure around it, or we're planning for it to make sure that the system continues to be reliable. It gets more complicated as time goes by. We have been, speaking of economic development, we have been doing extensive scenario modeling around different economic development projects. Understand the potential capability, not only when we have an economic development project that's already knocking on our door, but also to plan for future ones that are not even here, just to see where can our system take or accommodate large growth, which pockets in our area can accommodate large growth, and which ones are preferred over others. Again, not only from a resource generation perspective, but for the transmission reliability perspective. We continue to review market trends impacting variable energy resources. The monetary value of these variable energy resources continues to change dramatically in a positive way. We continue to see declines in cost of solar and wind and batteries, and pretty much every time you look around, when you come back, it's changed, right? So it's just keeping on top of these new information, new technologies, better, more efficient. It's important for us that we keep flexibility in our planning process, but that we're also taking advantage of existing technology that is provided at low cost and provides a monetary value for our customer owners. In here, this year, we are doing a potentiality study on demand-side management. This is something that our customer group is leading, and we are including those assumptions on how much potential there is in the region for demand-side management and energy efficiency, and that's certainly something that will be included in our corporate operating plan. How many of our monetary resources we're using to help shave that load and manage that load that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. This is not, in and of itself, is not SD9, but it is something that informs the type of resource planning that we do. We stood up, I don't know if standing up is the right word, but certainly we have expanded significantly our alternative energy program. We have a team that focuses exclusively on alternative energy and studying physical characteristics of the different generation resources, different costs, simulation, going out and talking to different vendors. Another way to stay on top of not only the monetary side that I just described earlier, but the engineering and the physical side of these resources. They're new. They're relatively new. They're variable. They provide a lot of different attributes that we haven't necessarily considered in the past. So it's something that under Mary Fisher's leadership, we're really we're staying on top of these. I'm really excited about that function in our program. Speaking of additional reliability services, it's these new technologies in combination with existing technologies may or may not provide additional reliability and resiliency services. Some of this is breaking technology. It's technology that has only been used in a few parts of the United States, maybe overseas, and just understanding what the new attributes that these technologies could deliver to our customer owners in terms of reliability and resiliency. We're excited about what we're seeing, but it's a lot of information. It's staying on top of really new technology, making sure that we're considering it, we're studying it well, and that when we make a recommendation to the board, that we have good information to make that recommendation. Remember, these are going to be assets that are going to stay in our system for 20 years or more, right? So we want to make sure that we don't make investments based on partial information. That's one of the reasons why it's taking us so long to go through this analysis and eventually start the stakeholder process.
Yeah, and again, I want to mention that during our four-hour sessions.
Felt like 4 years.
That we felt probably for some of you, we got to meet some of the great, staff that you have to help you to back this up. They're a young, eager staff, highly intelligent, looking outside the box, and we really appreciate them. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate the information about the alternative energy program and that new focus. The language of alternative kind of indicates that it would be different than the expected, so I guess we can leave that where it is for now. Maybe it's new or emerging energy program, something like that. But I appreciate the focus on recognizing those new technologies and how they can be a benefit to the utility. Thanks for making that available to us, and I look forward to more of that information about what they're working on being available to the ratepayers as well as we go through some of that stakeholder process. Because we see more and more of the new energy investments being made at other utilities being in the area of renewables or demand management or transmission or storage, and so while it is, again, referred to as alternative now, I think that in the future it's going to become much more standard, as that is the most effective and most cost-effective way to provide the reliability and economics that we're looking for. So I appreciate this new focus, and thanks for making that information available to us through that training and here and through the stakeholder process in the future.
Yeah.
And when these become standard, we'll have other alternatives, right? And this is one thing that I'm really excited about.
Even newer.
Always staying on
More
top
exciting.
of what's next, what's new.
And this is a good time to point out to the public, if they're listening, the holistic approach that this company takes. It's just not your finance group that's looking at this. It's every person. It's Mary's team. It's Julie's team. It's
Troy's team.
Lisa's team. It's Troy's team. The entire holistic approach. Every manager is looking at this and talking about it, and it's just not one thing. It's an entire holistic approach that we're working on.
So Javier, on the last bullet, the ongoing study of growing reliability capabilities, and I know you're talking about something different probably, but would this include a SAMP, a strategic asset management program, that would look at our transmission and distribution system and how that interacts with, does this go under this SD, or is that under a different SD, or is that part of the process?
So
I guess making sure that we get that SAMP and that we're looking at that along with all of our other resources.
A SAMP, a strategic asset management program, is something that we're looking into. It's part of our asset management practice. It's part of the international standards. A SAMP will tell you as a board and will tell us as management, are we investing in the right asset at the right time, in the right sequence, so that it delivers the strategic directives that the board has set for us. Eventually, all of these, not only the last bullet, but the entire resource planning will be part of what's informing the type of investments we're making to deliver low rates, high reliability, good sustainability, good customer satisfaction, and et cetera. What we're looking at, really the last bullet point looks at what else can these variable energy resources deliver? Not only the variability of the energy, but are there any other attributes? I'm talking about reliability and resiliency, voltage support, frequency, things that haven't traditionally been part of just the traditional resource planning, but now as things get more variable, they get more integrated into the system, we need to take into account how is this affecting the transmission side of the system. So that's really what that bullet point is meant to be.
Yeah,
Director Mohol, I would say where you would see the SAMP certainly is going to be part of the work that Troy and that strategic initiative is going to be focused on as an example, as a component of the example of that initiative, but that will probably show up in the reliability strategic directive. That's probably where it most likely, not only the construction and the implementation of it, but then the ongoing maintenance of that.
And planning going forward.
Yeah, exactly.
If I may, your corporate operating plan in the future should have a strategic asset management plan next to it. Say, how are you marrying the capital investment with your O&M investment, and how both of these are meeting your strategic objectives?
Right.
That's how I see it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I love it when I hear SAMP on a board meeting.
That's his favorite.
I'm a big
acronym.
fan of that. Okay. Believe it or not, we're just on the first bullet, so the second bullet should go faster. We're using multiple scenarios, so it's not just one deterministic scenario. We need to consider the complex nature of the world we live in, evaluate all the risks, economic growth, regulations, emerging technologies, everything that I've been talking about so far. We have seen in the past 20 years natural gas fracking, decreasing cost of renewables. We've continued to see emerging technologies and an evolving perspective on environmental impacts. Director Yoder mentioned earlier SD7. That's something that continues to evolve, and that's part of the environment we live in, and we're taking those inputs into account. Also, flexibility and optionality are highly valuable. As technology changes, and it's changing so fast, having flexibility and optionality is incredibly important. As we make decisions on capital investments that are going to be here for 30 or more years, we want to make sure that we don't use all of our eggs, we don't put all of our eggs in one basket, and we find ourselves 5 years from now or 10 years from now second guessing what we did. So it's adding that flexibility and that optionality is really, really important for this planning function. These opportunities also have risk, and those risks are financial and operational risks. And so we have to make sure that we're looking at all of the above as we present different portfolios. There are ways for us to mitigate some of those risks. For example, on the operational side, we have regulatory requirements that we need to make sure that we're operating our system with minimum operational standards. We have different bodies that tell us how, what is the minimum standard that we need to operate, and that helps mitigate some of the operational risk. If we have a portfolio that doesn't meet those standards, then we don't consider it, right? It puts too much risk on the operational side. I would say on the operational side, even our regulatory bodies are having a hard time keeping up with all the requirements, all these changing technology, the changing technology. So they are also looking at adding or improving their standards, and we're keeping track of that so that we're always meeting those standards. Financial risk can be mitigated by looking at the lows and the highs. What are all different potential scenarios of fuel prices, load, different wind penetration, all the different scenarios that could potentially happen to us. Make sure that we're looking at the entire spectrum as opposed to just the mean. If we can find a solution that financially helps us navigate on any of these scenarios, that is a way for us to mitigate that financial risk for ourselves and for our customer owners. Ultimately, all of this is to contribute to rate stability and OPPD's financial health. It's really, really important as well. It's not only keeping up with the latest technology, doing it in an operational, efficient way, but in a way that also keeps our rates stable and as low as possible. The following two slides, it's just to show in a graphical way the different variations. I'm not going to pretend to walk you through each one of those lines, but it shows you all different scenarios that we use, for example, on when we're projecting gas prices, coal prices, all the way out 20 years into the future. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in 2031 for gas prices, but we know, based on different assumptions, that for example, gas prices or coal prices could be in the range that we're presenting to you. So we have models that help us figuring out shock the results. Say if we have an environment with low coal, low gas, and low power purchases, what would that do to our model versus an environment where it's exactly the opposite? We're looking at the whole range for these are some of the most important inputs, not the only ones. Another set of inputs is our system load. What happens if we lose load, either by more efficient use of our power or by customers or population leaving our service territory? Conversely, what happens when we add load? How fast? When do you add it? How much load? So we need to take into account all of those different scenarios on the green graph at the top. At the bottom is the north wind penetration that I referred to earlier in that map. Wind is a fantastic resource. Too much of it coming from the same region could pose certain problems on congestion and pricing. So we need to anticipate what could that look like in our region as we plan for those resources. We use those market assumptions. We generate different portfolio results, many different results, and then we optimize this. Efficient frontier is really just a concept of saying we will generate different portfolios. If we have one portfolio that has the same cost but has lower reliability than another portfolio, then that first portfolio is a dominated strategy. We would never consider that. So when we talk about an efficient frontier, is really looking at, for the same cost, can we get the highest reliability and the highest sustainability profile? Or for the high sustainability profile, can we get the lowest cost and the best reliability? That's looking at that efficient frontier of where can we get the best attributes for each one of those portfolios on this efficient frontier. That helps us figure out what is the art of the possible and what are going to be the trade-offs between reliability, affordability, and sustainability. At the end, we're ensuring that all integrated resource and strategic plans support and align with OPPD strategic directives. I've already mentioned affordability, reliability, customer satisfaction, sustainability. Very much so, everything we do here has to meet these directives. We wouldn't do resource planning for the sake of doing it, although it's fun and some people really like it. We're doing it really to meet those other strategic directives that the board has asked us. I contend that resource planning is there to meet all strategic directives. These are some of the ones that are the most obvious, the ones that have a direct impact, but employee satisfaction and others are very much part of that. Of what this resource planning is helping with. Resource planning, I want to emphasize this. Resource planning is a function to satisfy the competing interests for many strategic directives. It's not a goal in and of itself. We don't get a medal for doing resource planning, but we need resource planning to really satisfy and move and advance the organization to where the board wants us to do. So it's critical, really important for us to do it, and we're proud of the way we're doing these. Whether for short-term planning or long-term planning, we use the best available data sources. Those data sources will change as time goes by. We're trying to stay on top of the best and most reliable data. But from time to time, we'll have to come back and say, hey, the data we were using before is no longer valid. We'll replace it with new and better data. We've talked about the team that does these. Are true professionals, really smart people. Some of them are here in the room. We're looking at some transmission folks that are helping us with some of these. We continue to look at best-in-class software platforms. We're not just going to buy the latest and greatest software, but we will do that when it's warranted, and when we have the people that are trained and can use that software. I'm very excited to report the 2018 change that we made on the platform that we're using. And really important that our results are thoroughly reviewed using quantitative and visual methods. We are stressing those results via stochastic analysis. And I believe that today we are reducing the overall financial risk borne by our customer owners. We are not eliminating it. There's always going to be risk, operational and financial, but I believe that the process is allowing us to reduce significantly those risks on the operational and financial side. With that, I presented this to System Management Committee, which has reviewed these and accepted the monitoring report, and we're recommending these for your consideration on Thursday for this SD to be sufficiently in compliance. And with that, I'll answer any questions you may have.
I think the committee members who met did not see any red flags, and we're happy for very thorough and well, the thorough and the deep dive really into SD9. Very impressed with it, and thank you for it.
Thank you.
I don't, unless there's any comment here, I think it's okay to put it on the consent agenda.
Okay, it'll be consent agenda. Thank you.
Good job, Javier. That was really helpful. I'm transitioning a little bit. Is this, so when we get to August workshop, is discussion around this SD and its merits and its purpose
Yes,
part of the, okay.
yeah.
I
you
think
know,
it should be. Yeah.
It should be, yeah.
Yep, all
SD,
right.
as far as, the discussion of what is the merits of this? Is it repetitive, and the other SDs, is it needed, or that will be discussed?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Scott, you've got that on the calendar for that?
For sure. I guess what I want to add, the Monday that we're teeing up, or the morning that we're teeing up for that session, is really going to be focused on understanding what are the strategic directives in and of themselves are fine, that the way they stand, and I'm guessing there'll be most of them, hoping that there will be. And then we'll be teeing up the ones that really warrant by consensus, I guess, of the board, without being really consensus, I suppose, but a general interest of the board to tee up for priority discussion.
Great.
Is there some kind of request for input ahead of time? Aren't we
Yes.
getting some phone call?
Yeah, there will be, and we're still finalizing those details, so I don't have dates and times,
Yes.
but the call you're getting is separate from the...
The agenda set?
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, you want a nuclear?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yes.
Ms. Fisher.
Nuclear oversight, thank you. I still get to say good morning.
Yeah.
Yes. You got 14 minutes.
There was never any doubt.
I'll start with the nuclear report. And I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up. We are still integrating Energy Solutions team members into our projects. I'm happy to report that all of our projects now have a blend of OPPD and Energy Solutions, so we're getting both the technical information from them, and they're working with us on our projects to make sure those go smoothly. So the combined skills and experience of the team are now being utilized, so it's a great step forward. We also have started the construction of the independent spent fuel storage installation operations facility, which is the security facility for that installation. That has been delayed a little bit due to Missouri River levels, but I'm happy to say that it has now been started, and we still believe that we will have it constructed in the time frame that we had scheduled. We had some time in there for delays, but we still believe that we will have it available as necessary and on schedule. The project that I want to report on a little bit is, I've talked a lot about moving our fuel and the building of the dry cask, and we made a significant accomplishment over the last month, and I brought you some pictures because I think pictures are worth a thousand words. And so I'll just go through what we've been working on and kind of give you the magnitude of the project that we're working on. This is the raw materials coming in on the left over here. I thought the pointer would work. On the top left, I'm sorry? Doesn't work. On the top left are the aluminum ingots coming in, and then they got extruded into rail forms that you see kind of in the bottom center. And I'll talk a little bit more about those here in just a minute and what the importance is of those. But this is the raw materials coming in. These are the rails. If I refer to the rails, this is what the rails are. Those were extruded from those ingots that you just saw in the last picture. And I'll show you how we're using those in just a second. And they're also rolling our shells, and so they brought in material, they actually rolled those, and then they actually weld them together. So there's a long weld that goes along the shell plane, or what I've been calling the canisters as we've made these reports. And so at the end, this is what they look like. So they have a top and a bottom, which is what the bottom picture shows, end caps, and then the construction, the welding that was going on to actually put these shells or canisters together. So the length of those is about 5.5 feet in diameter and 15 feet long. So very large components. Inside of the shell are the baskets, and we've had a little bit of discussion about the baskets. I thought you'd like to see those. The picture on the right shows a completed basket. And each one of those squares will hold an individual fuel bundle. So the fuel bundles go into those squares. But as you can see, the shape of that is square. And so what happens is you use the rails to make it a round shape. So the rails get inserted, and if you look at the top right of the picture on the right, you can kind of see how that rail got inserted on the side of that basket to make it a round shape. So we've been putting those together. And then they take those, they lift them up, you can see in the middle picture, or they're lifting them up and they're moving them over. Down below, which is really hard to see, but it says the shell is down here, so the completed shell is down below. They're taking those baskets and they're moving them over, and they're putting them into a heated shell. And then the shell, as it cools, shrink fits to fit around that basket. And so, as we've been talking about all of the components that are coming together, I thought perhaps you would like to see some pictures about how this is being conducted. And the milestone is that we now have 2 of these ready to go. And so 2 out of the 32 that we need, that's great. And so the production of these is starting to pick up, as we had talked about last month. And we're really happy to have those because we have dry runs coming up. They'll ship us one. We can actually do a dry run with one of these. Nuclear Regulatory Commission will be out to witness some of the dry runs. So having these going into production now is a great step forward. Hopefully that explains a lot about what's been going on.
It does explain a lot. Thank you very much. I do have a quick question.
Yes.
On the operation, putting it in place. I'm assuming there's some post-fabrication testing, material testing? And then if, no? Yes? No?
There's a lot that goes on as you're putting them together. So like the welds, they all get dye-penetrant testing, and they actually put on end caps that are temporary, and they test all the welds to make sure that they are sealed properly and that there are no leaks in them. So they'll do pressure tests on those. All of that's been done before it ever gets here.
Yeah, and then once installed and in full operation, then there is no further testing that happens at that point, is that true?
There is no testing necessarily until we actually get them installed, and then we do monitoring on them.
Yep, thank you.
Go back to those baskets.
I will. You want to go here or here?
Yeah, I'm right there. You know, before, maybe you could explain the radiological effects of this, how each rod you studied as far as the fuel cell, as far as each fuel cell, and how you decide to put what into what, if you want to explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so early on last year, we did characterization of each fuel rod.
Thank you.
We brought the fuel rod up, we looked at it, visually inspected it to make sure that it was intact. We do have some that have had failures in them, I would say, but they're minor defects is a way to think about it, as they've been going through operations. And it's not unusual to have that, which is why you do the characterization, to make sure you know what condition they're in. And then they do a study, and they figure out a pattern of how many you can have in each one of these baskets to make sure that radiologically you're meeting all of the restrictions or all of the regulations that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission puts on these units. So we have requirements that we have to meet for each one of these to make sure that the radioactivity on the outside, once it is input into the modules that are on site, once they're putting the concrete modules on site, that we meet the restrictions for each one of those and the facility itself. And so that was the characterization, I
Yeah,
believe, is
thank
what
you.
you were.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's important to point that out, you know, that we're doing that as far as safety and regulations and everything.
So, this assembly is happening at the vendor,
Yes.
right? In the East Coast, is that right?
I'm sorry, and what?
Where is it?
In Greensboro, North Carolina.
North Carolina, okay. So once they're fully assembled, that last picture that you showed, that's how they'll arrive here?
They'll arrive here, correct.
Okay.
And so they'll ship them here. We'll put them into our building. We'll bring over each individual fuel bundle, load each one into each one of those squares in a very specific pattern.
Yep.
And then we'll put the end caps on them. There's what they call a crawler, which is a very large machine that will actually move them over to the concrete bunkers that I've talked about before and insert them into those bunkers. So each one will have to move over to that facility and then be installed there permanently.
And that's why you have the dry run, that you think one empty one comes out and you can do a dry run of it all.
We will have dry runs.
A lot of dry
yes.
runs, a
Yes.
lot of them.
The dress rehearsal.
I'm
A lot of
sorry?
dress rehearsals. Yes. Over and over again. And I think Director Wagner and I are going to have a tour.
You are.
Tomorrow morning. We appreciate your time.
That's right.
For doing that, yeah.
Yeah. Yep, glad to have it. To conclude my report, I would just like to talk a little bit about what our Nuclear Oversight Committee does at the plant. They've done a couple of things over the last month. One is they've been doing a vendor audit on a steel company that has been providing some of the bridge modifications that we need to have to support the area where these will be actually brought in and then taken back out. When you're doing 1 or 2, it's different than when you're doing 30, and so we need to make sure that we build that area up a little bit. So they did a vendor on it and found that the vendor was in compliance with everything that they needed to meet in order to provide nuclear materials to us. The second thing that they've done is they did a vendor surveillance of T.N. Arano, who is the company that is doing this, and their training programs. So they will actually be sending people out here to help us with this movement. We wanted to make sure that they had proper training and qualification of their personnel. So we went out and we witnessed some of that training. So that's another great thing that they provide to us and give us feedback. Last but not least, they've done an internal audit on our radiation protection and nuclear fuels program. And it goes through a number of different sections that they need to go through to make sure that we meet our regulatory requirements. There were 11 different audited templates that were expected. So when we say a radiation protection audit, it's pretty extensive. And the audit team did not identify any issues adversely impacting these programs or the effectiveness of the quality assurance program. The audit resulted in 11 deficiencies and 3 enhancements. So typically those are things that procedurally they want us to change, or maybe we didn't do all the paperwork correctly. Those sorts of things were what they identified. And with that, I'll take any other questions.
Mary, can you just give us a flavor for the site modifications that you've identified?
I'm sorry, speak to what?
The team has identified the site modifications required to complete the fuel moves. Just at like a high level, what kind of site modifications are we talking about?
That's what I just talked about a little bit about the ramp that goes in and out of the building, making sure that we reinforce the concrete there.
Got it. Okay.
As we get these components in, the weight of those, we want to make sure that they're dispersed appropriately. So if there was a seismic event, that would not have any adverse impacts, that it would be settled in there appropriately. Those are the sorts of things that we're doing as far as site modifications. We're also building the ISFA-C security facility. So those would be the 2 things that we're
Got it. Thank you.
But I think what they'll do when they do the original dress rehearsal for better.
Or several.
Is that they'll identify, are there things within the pathway that they really need to do differently or want to do differently just to secure that pathway?
There's actually a roadway that
Right.
will make sure that is secure, but it is secure, I shouldn't say that, but that there isn't anything in there that we need to actually shore up as well.
I have a question. Shifting to your second bullet, the beginning of this construction was delayed due to Missouri River water levels.
Yeah.
So can you bring me up to date on how you're considering what that level might be in the future, not just for this facility, but maybe for some of the others?
Sure. So the independent spent fuel storage installation itself is built at 1,009 feet and 1,009.5 feet, which was about 3 feet above the highest flood level that we've seen at the facility. And so we are building this new structure for security purposes at that same level. And so we're actually building it up substantially to make sure that it is at the same level as the SOC pad itself.
I guess another way to establish a metric there might be to look at the mapping that's associated with 100, 500, 1,000-year floods. Is that 3 foot? Where does that relate to existing, and is there any change for projected?
I don't think there's any change for projected that we're aware of today. I think what we've seen is in that kind of 1,006 and a half or 1,006 and 11 inches, I think is what the flood level was at 2011, which was a 500-year flood. And so I believe that's really what we're using as the basis. Should something come, you know, that says that we need to adjust to that, we believe that the 3 feet that's there is sufficient. But should that come, the other thing that we do, these facilities are built to be able to take on water. And so as the facility is constructed, we'll make sure that we look at that. You know, it's still going to be the personnel getting in and out would be the issue that we want to take a long-term look at.
Okay.
But today, I believe that the 3 feet is sufficient.
And from what we saw yesterday, traveling through that area, if it gets higher than that, the water all goes to Iowa. Pretty much what we saw yesterday.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
The water goes over there, and it's still over there, like miles and
Yeah.
miles.
Oh, yeah.
Miles and miles of property still underwater.
Yeah.
Over in Iowa. It's just heartbreaking.
Yes.
It is.
It
Okay.
is.
Any other comments, questions? That completes our report. Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have governance. Mr. Cavanagh.
The Governance Committee did not have a pre-committee meeting this month. On the agenda today, we have one item, which is actually an action item that we'll be voting on Thursday, and it's the annual health plan report. Our current health plan includes health insurance and dental care as well. And due to the structure of our health plan, the district is required, or we're required both by district policy and state law to prepare an annual report on the health plan and required reserves. And Mart will go ahead and give us that report now.
Sure. I wanted to just, for the sake of context for folks who haven't been here as long as others, just give you a couple of milestones with our health plan and our dental plan. So in January of 2013, all employees who are coming in new to the organization are required to go into our high deductible health plan. So they do not have an option. They are required to go into that. So one of the things you're going to see as a result of that is the numbers are growing in our high deductible health plan and lessening in our preferred provider organization, and cost is dropping a little bit. The other thing is that in 2017, we were successful in negotiating with the union's concurrence, increased deductibles for both our preferred provider organization and the high deductible health plan, as well as increasing the out-of-pocket maximums on both of those, and increasing some of their contribution to the specialty drugs and some of the other drug formularies on those plans.
What is the high deductible? What's the deductible now?
It went from $1,500 for an individual to $2,000 for an individual, and the family went from $3,000 to $4,000 for in-network services.
Are they allowed to contribute to an FSA to cover that, any amount that covers that deductible?
Yes, so in the high deductible health plan, there is a health savings plan, which they can contribute to. That is a savings plan that they can take with them if they leave the organization. We contribute to that. So for an individual, we contribute $700. For a family, we contribute $1,600 annually.
Okay, and they're able to roll that over year to year?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Mhm.
Or take it with them if they leave.
Right.
Yes. So the other thing I wanted to mention was that in 2018, we did decide to bid our third-party administrator services because the increase we were looking at with Blue Cross Blue Shield was pretty significant. And we did change our third-party provider to UMR. And so we've been using them during this year. We have not had a great number of problems, and any individual issues that have been brought up, we've been able to address. So that transition has gone well. So overall on the health plan, you look at the document that's attached in your board packet, our mental, dental, and prescription claims cost is about $30,000, well, $29,100. The other post-employment benefits or the OPEB plan, we make the contribution to the ARC, as we were talking about. That's $20,424,000. And then we have fees and reserve adjustments that we have to make. Those are also done, and that's about $3,642,000.
Mark, don't we normally get comparison to the previous year?
Yes, it's on the additional information that I provided to the board.
Okay.
Yeah, in the background, it's there.
Yeah, so overall, our active expenses were fairly flat, about $200,000 less than they were the previous year. And then the expenses that are paid, so employee and COBRA contributions are about $6,590,000. Prescription rebates, and these we get directly from the prescription providers, were about $911,000 last year. And then stop-loss reimbursements, we carry individual stop-loss on claims above $450,000. We also have aggregate stop-loss in the case that our claims go way, way high. And that was about $750,000. And then our Blue Card Access refunds, and those are for those people who have to go out of network. There's an extra fee paid when they do that, and we get reimbursed for some of that. We're about $38,100. So all in all, the total cost that OPPD paid for the health and dental plans was $44,877,000. We also have to keep 2 reserve accounts. One is for claims that are incurred but have not yet been presented, and these are actuarially calculated on a regular basis. The beginning balance, of course, was $3,057,000. We had activity of about 2,000 on that reserve, and so the ending balance was $3,055,000. On the monthly claims and expenses, we also have to keep a reserve to pay for the current month's expenses. So that's running around, our ending balance was $3,184,000 in that reserve account. And with that, I'll entertain any questions people have.
We're self-funded. Are there many other companies who are self-funded? Or
Yes, there are a lot of
There are a
companies
lot
that are
of them.
self-funded on their
And
claims.
can you just, I don't know if, for the new directors, can you give the benefits versus the challenges as far as self-funding?
Well, the biggest benefit is that fully insured programs are very expensive because they're taking all the risk. So they're very expensive, and the administration can be very expensive as well. Paying our own claims through a third-party administrator is much less expensive for the organization. It's the biggest benefit.
Just say it's probably not unusual for many public entities to do that. The
Yeah.
city of Lincoln, probably the city of Omaha, universities, most of them are, right?
Yeah.
And do our employees have a choice to go anywhere they want, or do we have any restrictions on that as far as in-house? What is in-house now? What would in-house be?
So when we switched our third-party provider to UMR, there was very, very little disruption to employees on the doctors they were using. We do check that before we make that kind of a change. The disruption was small percent, like 1 or 2%. It wasn't big. And so they are fairly free to go to most doctors that they want to. There's probably a few restrictions, but we haven't found that many people have complained or have not been able to see the doctor that they choose to see.
Okay, reason I bring this up is quite about 10 years ago, we tried to change it, and there was a lot of disruption.
Yes.
So we had to move back, so
Yeah.
it's a fewer disruption. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that.
I would just say Mark and her team, I know Mikkel's here and
Yes.
Vicki Lee's here too. If you talk about that transition from going from one third party to another third party, that can be somewhat difficult, stressful, a lot of time, a lot of work. And if you think about active employees and retirees, but they have done just an exceptional job. One is matching up the doctors early on in the process with UMR, matching up pharmaceuticals with with the third parties to make sure there's as much match and as there possibly can be, and then just the service that they provide in that whole benefits group to retiree and active, I think has been amazing. So,
Yeah, I also want to commend the union leadership. Their involvement in the process was really critical to us too, and has been very helpful in smoothing some of the transition, so we appreciate that as well.
yeah,
Are
very
you,
good.
are you able to negotiate some of the provider and pharmacy network before you get into the contract, or is that something that's pretty much standard? that
It's
you have
pretty
to
much
just accept?
standard, but we can if there are specific issues, and we have in the past. With some of the vendors we've had in the past, Nebraska City coverage was very difficult to get taken care of, and so we've negotiated some of that.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Mhm.
Good work.
thank
Can
you.
you clarify for me where some of these reimbursements and refunds are coming from? Like, who's refunding that?
So the refunds on the pharmaceutical come through the vendors
Okay.
themselves. They
Okay.
give rebates on prescriptions. We
Okay.
filter most of that through RDS. Yes? Through RDS. Okay, so
Can you
it's through a
repeat that for the
broker.
record?
So, yeah, so the prescription rebates, anytime you get a prescription, quite often the prescription companies pay a rebate. Sometimes the brokers take those. We negotiate that they come back to us. And so those rebates are provided back to us through the provider.
Okay.
And then the reserve adjustments, I think, are just because of what we pay and what we don't pay out of the reserves. Yeah,
Sure.
so it's the actuarial calculations on those. The stop-loss reimbursements also come from our carrier,
Okay.
the third-party administrator, as well as the access fee
Okay.
refunds.
Are we asking the employees, are we sort of promoting the idea for the employees to find out ahead of time exactly what the costs are?
Absolutely,
as
and
far as
that was
being
one
able
of the
to-
things that we really liked about UMR's platform, is that they do have much more choice. We have mobile apps that folks can go in and talk with their doctor about a procedure that they need and look for the best cost, highest quality care that they can get.
Yeah, I think it was really, the personal experience is being able to look for a doctor that has been rated by others and be able to do that comparison. I think that was very interesting, and not just a comparison of service and quality, but also on price, and that's unique. And so I think people are taking advantage of that.
Yes.
Makes us better
Laura,
consumers.
More of that.
I think I have a unity of control question.
Mhm.
So my assumption, my understanding is that this is not, the design of our health plan is not something that the board has any responsibility for doing, right?
Yes, I think they do, don't they, Steve, help me out.
I didn't quite hear the question.
So the benefits that we provide to our employees is a board decision?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
The fact of establishing a benefit plan is a board decision. Beyond that, it's implemented by management, but yes, the board decides whether they'll
the act
offer
of
them.
establishing and actually what it is a board decision?
That's right.
Okay.
Well,
Remind me
theoretically,
how-
it'd be through the
What about the
labor
union?
negotiations as well.
So
Union
so the
negotiations.
changes that happen to it generally are through
Right.
negotiations, and you approve those
So
negotiated
that's when it
changes?
happens.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
That's another overlay, but yes.
Okay, so that helps explain that, and then I guess as you're going through the process of designing it, bringing us something to approve, I'm kind of curious as to what strategic directives in your mind kind of drive what the design looks like, if that makes sense?
So there are several, certainly. Our employee relations one does. Cost to run the business is a big piece that we take a look at. I think we also want to make sure that we're minimizing risk to the extent that we can. So all of those factors go into what we look at.
Great, thank you.
Steve, you might have been the only person here who's around back in 1991, I guess, but prior to 91, I'm assuming the district wasn't self-funded back then as far as, is that why this clause in the Section A is there? I thought, well, wait a minute, what the hell did they have before 1991?
I've been around for a while, but 81 predates even me.
I was kind of curious, I'm assuming
Yeah, he's not bad.
that it wasn't self-funded back then?
91?
Yeah, prior to?
I don't know the answer to that.
I'm thinking that act was not around as far back, that far back, but I don't know that for sure. I could easily find that answer.
I was kind of curious, I was just reading that, the paragraph A, and I thought, well, wait a minute, what did the formation occurred in 91, there had to be health care prior to that.
I could look into that.
Statutorily, we were not able to do that.
Okay.
I mean, as a public power district, as
At the state
part of
level.
the state level, we may not have been able to do that. and that
That's
may
right.
come through with some other.
That's what I'm thinking.
Federal legislation that allows the states to be able to do that.
Yep.
Okay.
You know, one thing in your report that I have not seen that I really appreciate is your healthcare compliance and preventive reminder programs. You have a diabetes program and
Yes,
also
we
a
do.
spine management program. I think that's excellent. It really is.
Well, and this is something we need to vote on Thursday, basically saying that we feel that the policy is in compliance with our policy as well as with state law. It's good to see these figures turning in the good direction. I know how difficult and challenging.
Yeah.
it is
Yes,
to do.
when
That's 2
healthcare
years in a row,
expenses are
right?
going up to decrease our costs
Yeah.
is amazing.
Yeah.
This 2 years in a row, I believe it's been
Oh,
done.
Eric?
From earlier, we talked about the OPED, and I see 20,424. This is that contribution that we mentioned earlier, the
To
20
OPEB.
million. So this is the transfer from this into that other account.
Correct.
Great, thank you for clarification.
Yeah.
Good comment.
I would like to respond. As healthcare costs go up, we're increasing our costs, but employees.
Yes, they are.
So I don't want to obviate the fact that it's, our employees are us, we're paying that. So it's not win-win-win for everyone, but it's important to acknowledge that, and that's part of that employee engagement, right? And so.
Which is good that we're getting more and more transparency as far as our employees can look at that and see the transparency with the healthcare costs. It's hard to,
absolutely.
it's hard to find, it really is, with the hospital bills are very confusing sometimes.
Yes, they can be.
Thanks, Mark. And seeing no other questions, that concludes this topic,
Okay.
this item, and is also our committee.
Great, thanks. I have one addendum to the agenda. Kate, if you could maybe discuss it, last month in closed session, you talked a little bit about cyber and everything, but you also mentioned that you were looking for a director of physical security, and I think you have hired one. If you can maybe introduce him, even though he's not here and hasn't started working yet.
No, I'd be happy to. So yes, in that discussion, I mentioned we hired a director of corporate security, which is a new role in our environment. So this person is going to start July 15th. His name is Owen Yardley, and he comes to us with a lot of experience, most recently from UNL, and I'm going to read his title because it's long. He was Assistant Vice Chancellor and Chief of Police at the University of Nebraska. So he's coming to us with that experience. Additionally, he worked at Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, so he has emergency planning background, law enforcement. Think about large events with many people at them that he secures, such as a Husker football game. So he has a lot of background in different areas that I think will be very important for us we can leverage into our environment. So he will be securing from a corporate physical security perspective, so that's around people, customers, and assets. So we're looking forward to having him join our team, and I think he'll be a little surprised that I just talked about him.
Right, and this is a new position.
It
This
is, it's a
whole
brand new position.
It's a brand new, different
Never existed
position.
here before.
Yeah.
So the folks that,
people at one of our meetings, it should be a problem. Just for instance.
It's a whole different set of problems, but
Instead-
not on the security side.
Instead, he's looking at a whole 365,000 customers, yeah.
So I do want, we have corporate security folks here right now. They do report under Joshua Malk as the director of our information security group. They will roll out from under Joshua. He's done a great job. They'll roll out from under him, and then they will report to Owen, and he will own that aspect. But both cybersecurity and corporate physical security are very closely intertwined, so those two folks will work closely together, meeting Joshua, his team, and then Owen and his new team.
Will that be
I
at the
think it's a
director
great-
level?
Excuse me?
Will he be like at the director level, I guess, would you say, or not?
He's at the director level.
Kudos to you, Kate, for
Oh, thank you.
scoring big on that. That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, we're very excited.
Okay, great, thank you very much. And so that completes our agenda. We didn't discuss whether or not, just to make sure that health savings, should that go on the consensus agenda or
Probably can't.
consent agenda for everybody?
Think so.
Okay. And then Julie Comstock, we'll be looking forward to your presentation on Thursday
Yes.
with your strategic
Customer
initiatives.
engagement.
Yes, okay.
And happy birthday.
And happy birthday, yes.
Now you can take the afternoon off.
Yeah, sure.
Well, you better talk to the boss.
Okay, that concludes our meeting for today. Thank you. Thank you. And we do have lunch for everybody. We do? We have lunch? Yeah, we have lunch.